Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission here is to help 1 million people start a business of their own and ensure anyone that starts a business never feels alone doing it. We're also broadcasting live from the Belsize Park Community Library. Part of our mission is to save libraries. My personal experience of libraries has been that it's been the only place you can walk into today that doesn't ask you for money as soon as you walk in. It's the only place where you can get free Wi-Fi, and obviously it's a source of knowledge. In the future, we believe that libraries won't just be where you get knowledge from books, but you can get knowledge from podcasts like ours today. We hope in the future that libraries will be a part of your life, and of course during COVID, everything changes. But libraries have been suffering long before COVID. But we believe in the future they could be an after-school activity for kids to go to learn entrepreneurship. We believe libraries could become an entrepreneur hub. Let's say WeWorks for free. My guest today, I'm really quite excited about. Nick Jenkins, who is the founder of Moonpig, an entrepreneur, an angel investor. He's someone, when we started the podcast a year ago, we wrote his name down as an ideal guest, someone we would love to have on. I first heard Nick's name when I was living in Hong Kong, and I just sold my company Fluid to PwC, the accounts company, and I was feeling rather excited about it. And for anyone that's lived in Asia, you know how honest people are out there. And I was saying to someone, what shall I do next? And they said to me, why don't you do a Dragon's Den of Asia? You're like that Nick Jenkins guy, but not as successful. I have since come to really enjoy watching Nick on programs like Dragon's Den, listening to him on talks, and have come to understand that, in fact, I'm nothing like him in many ways. He started his company as a sole founder at Moonpig. I've always started businesses with founders, and I honestly think I wouldn't be successful today if I hadn't. All the businesses that I've started on my own weren't as successful as the ones where I had a co-founder. I also looked at Nick's education. I left school at 15 years old with no education. Nick had a fantastic education, got a fantastic MBA, and often raves about how much that education has supported what he's doing today. So from my experience of Nick, we have some common moral code elements. He talks about in the past how his advisors have helped him. He gives credit to other people for things like Moonpig actually being successful. There was one moment when he was building that business when it was in a near-death state. He wasn't charging enough for the cards. They were $1.99. And one of his advisors said, charge $2.99. Nick, who believed that was not the right thing to do, did in fact do it, listened to his advisor, made that decision, and it made the business a huge success. Nick doesn't take all the credit for himself. He explains that it was that advisor that gave him that knowledge. I must confess myself sometimes when I'm giving knowledge out to people that I sometimes forget the source, forget to credit the source. Every time I've ever seen Nick speak at any event or any activity online, he always credits the people that's given him the knowledge that he's got today. So it's with a great honour and privilege that I introduce our guest today, Nick Jenkins. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hello, Simon.
It's really great to have you here. Well, have I missed anything about your background? I mean, of course, angel investor.
No. That's all very accurate. Yeah, great.
And I guess it's always good for my listeners to perhaps get a gauge of you straight off, and hear perhaps what your view of success is, both personally and in a business.
I think over time, I've realised that success is much more of an all-round thing, and you look at. If you focus on success in one very narrow area of your life, it's often at the expense of others. And so I look at success as the various pillars of happiness that we have. Do we feel fulfilled? Do we feel as though being useful? Do we have good relationships? And are we healthy? All these things make a successful human being. So I think nowadays I tend to look at is are we successful human beings? And that can. Most other people tend to look at it in a very narrow sense. Have you made money? So yes, you could be. If you talk about financial success, that's very, very narrow. If you talk about success as a human being, it's how have you done all round, and that's a different thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've listened to so many things that you've said in the past. I feel like I know you quite well. You know, one of the things you said before that I liked as well, you know, when you shake someone's hand, you don't want to worry you've lost a finger. So, you know, that whole concept that you can trust people and that kind of reputation, which I think is very important. It seems to be, of course, very important to you, but I feel a lot of people in business do learn, it's good to tread on people and get ahead, and somehow that's a measure of success, the financial gain or the success of the business. But am I right in thinking that you very much care about your reputation?
Well, I care about doing the right thing. I think a very important part of the quality of life is conscience. And do you look at yourself and think you've done the right thing? What I've also found is that if you do the right thing and if you behave well, more people want to do business with you. I want to do business with people that I trust. I want to do business with people that I enjoy doing business with. We spend a lot of our time doing business, so we might as well do it with people that we enjoy spending time with. So I think that's quite an important element. But going back to the point about counting your fingers when you're shaking someone's hand, if you know that someone is a sharp practitioner, you'll always be more careful about going into business with them, and also making sure you're absolutely covered and so on. So it's just smoother and easier if you do things in the right way. I'm also a great believer, by the way, that the best deals are the deals where both parties think they did a good deal. It's not about winning. This is not, Trump's view of this would be, in order for me to win, someone else has to die. And I don't believe that's true. I think I think the very best deals are deals where both parties feel as though that was a fair deal, because you do more of those deals. Every time you do a deal with someone who feels as though they've been shafted, you're never going to do business with that person again. Whereas the person who thinks, right, that worked well, I can do business with Nick, we'll do it again. So I think it's not just because I think it's important to be a good person, to be a good citizen, a good human being. I think it's because it also leads to it's like looking after your customers. You can shaft your customers once, but they'll never come back. So why not just look after them? And the same applies, I think, to business partners and investors. If you look after them, if you treat them well and treat them honourably, then they come back.
Yes, it's a very interesting point and a nuance that I really love my listeners to pick up on, because I know myself, I've started 18 companies. I have done deals with people and didn't realise that they were sharks. Didn't realise that they were bad people. How do you gauge that? How do you actually discover that before you end up, for example, investing in them? I mean, you can't always tell until you're in there in the business with them.
You can look at the deals they've done in the past. You can... I do a little bit of research into the people that I do business with as investors or in any other respect. I look at their track record, I look at companies they've done. If I see that somebody, for example, if someone's asking for investment and I see in Companies House they've got a long trail of dissolved, liquidated companies where they've walked off with leaving creditors behind, that's not the style of business I like. So those are the kind of, and I suppose after a while you develop a good sense of people and whether or not you think they're open and honest. So I've relied very much on that.
Well, I got into business with my wife and fell in love with her during working with her because she was just so honest and authentic and real. And I think business does bring out the best and the worst in people. But if like you just said there, I mean, I remember my wife, we had a moment in 2003 when SARS hit Hong Kong. We were in trouble cash flow wise. And my wife was like, let's pay everyone first and we'll worry about ourselves second. But you only learn about someone's true values sometimes at that very moment, that very crunch moment.
Yeah.
And have you
and your staff will always remember that.
Oh, totally. I mean, a lot of the people that we work with today are friends of ours still today. I think that but it's also, but you just don't know. I've also worked with people that don't have a trail, don't necessarily have a footprint of having done anything wrong, got into business with them only to find out that they are bad. I think a lot of my listeners out there want a co-founder, for example. I know you'd started Moonpig as a single founder. I mean, do you feel like, that was an advantage being a single founder to you, or do you feel like getting into partnerships in the future has been something you've wanted to do? How's that played out for you?
There are two sides to that. One is that if you go into partnership with somebody, on day one, you've surrendered 50% of your company. So by the time you've raised some money and you've been diluted a few times, the danger is that with, say, 3 founders or even 4 founders, you end up at a point where the shareholding that you've got in the company isn't worth the time and effort that it takes, the commitment that it takes to drive it through to success. Where I started with 100% of it and then worked my way down. Now, a lot of people say, I needed co-founders because I needed that support. And the way I did it is that I founded it and then I brought in investors who were very supportive. So my investor directors, they came in and they put money in, and that was the reason why they supported it. The difficulty with going in with a co-founder is that it's unlikely that after 5 years that you're both going to have an equal idea of who contributed what to the success of the business. And then you have the awkwardness of who's actually going to lead this business. And I've seen plenty of companies that I've invested in where you have two co-founders and you know that one of them is not as good as the other, and you have to have that painful discussion. Those two co-founders can't have that discussion between them. So there are places where it's worked. Innocent worked very well, where you had three founders who all had. I mean, they all look back and they think actually they wouldn't have done it without that. So it can work, but the advantage of being a sole founder is that one, you start off with 100% of it, so you'll end up with a larger share when you finally get to exit. And you just have to find other ways to bring in the support and the mentoring that you would otherwise get from co-founders.
One of the reasons I do this podcast is to give people kind of, I guess, two sides of the same coin view, give them balanced insight. And what you're saying now, I actually agree with it, although I would say that for me, I did a 50-50 venture with someone, and if I hadn't done it, I would have 100% of nothing. So I actually found that bringing in a partner to kind of compensate my weaknesses helped. I mean, I know a lot about you. I feel like you have not that many weaknesses. You're quite rounded. Just my instinct. You understand branding. You understand finance.
Sure, plenty. But it was. I was very comfortable. I was very comfortable being a sole founder, and I didn't feel as though there were some aspects of business. I mean, you mentioned earlier on the introduction about the importance of an MBA, and I'm not necessarily sure how much I rate an MBA normally, but if you want to set up your own business, doing an MBA is very useful because it fills in all the gaps. It gives you enough to bluff in most areas of business. You don't learn much, but you know where the books are anyway. And it also just gives you enough confidence to realize that most business is common sense dressed up in jargon. And I had no experience of marketing before I started Moonpig, but Moonpig is primarily a marketing business. But I sort of had enough. I knew enough to bluff from the course to realise there's no science to it. There's no magic to it. It's common sense, and so that gave me the courage to basically learn what I needed to learn about every aspect of the business. But undoubtedly, some people where it's very difficult with co-founders is where one co-founder has the money and the other one doesn't. And then what happens is the business falters, more money needs to go in, and then they argue over, well, at what price does that go in? And that's often where things start to fall apart. But a lot of these things can be solved. Nowadays, when I invest in a business that has several co-founders, I insist on a shareholders agreement that binds those founders together. And if one of them leaves early, then they have to surrender their shares at a particular price. So I find the importance of the legal work in setting these things up is that you're basically having the arguments that you're likely to have at some point while you're still friends. So you're deciding the rules while you're also all still getting on very well and before there's a large amount of money to fight over. And that's why I think actually that these things can work, but you do have to set up the paperwork properly so that you've preempted all the little arguments and spats that you're likely to have. You've talked about how, if someone puts in money, how is that going to be priced and so on. So, there are ways around it.
I think it's such a key point you're highlighting here for people that are looking to start a business or even grow their business. Sometimes that early day structure will hinder you growing. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, I always think, my lawyer says to me, and the reason he's my lawyer is that people will always accept ink. I mean, ultimately, if people want to do bad things and steal from you, they can. And, do you want to then spend lots of money with lawyers going after them? But the legal agreement is really sometimes for the two of you to remember what you've agreed to, right? And definitely, my experience has been is that if you don't put that stuff in writing early, people do forget. Plus, later, it's actually when the business works, you have real problems, right?
Yeah, and it's so important that even that people forget as well. Memory is not 100%, and there are many cases where I look back at, I think I remember things one way, and I go back into my emails, and I'm quite a meticulous record keeper. I go back into my emails and realize that actually it was totally different. It happened to me only the other day as I was doing my tax return, and I got stung because I realized that I thought an agreement was written one way, and when I actually dug out the agreement, I realized it actually was drafted. It was drafted actually in a different way than we'd originally intended, but what it meant is I had to pay a lot more tax on it. But it's important to write things down do things because forget. So often I come across people who say, "Oh, well, I was promised that I would get 15% of the business," and you think, well, that was a verbal promise, but I mean, if you write that down, it would have said 15% at which point? At that point, or at the later point? 15% of the exit, 15% at the beginning. You know,
yeah, totally.
A lot of people ignore the legal side. They think it's fine, lawyers will deal with that. But actually, the one bit of advice I would give to founders is it's boring, but it's really, really important to get it right.
Yeah. Even if it's on, as you say, an email, at least there's some record of what's been agreed.
Yeah.
And my favorite story around that is in Star Wars, George Lucas called up a couple of the actors who wanted more money and said, take less money, but I'll give you a percentage of the profit from the film. And of course, then the film was a massive success and he changed the percentage. Yeah. And so, but they all joke about it now because they still made a lot of money from it. But you know, it's important. Yeah. And also it saves friendships, doesn't it? Because there's no, well, hold on, George, you told me 2.5% and you only gave me 2%. And people can have fallouts over these things, right? Back to reputation, I guess.
Yeah.
And so your MBA itself, these things are always quite rounded, but I guess there's also a network there that I actually spoke to someone recently, Stepan Galav. Have I said his name right? I'm slightly dyslexic.
Oh, yeah, Stepan Galav, yeah.
Yeah, and he absolutely raves about you, by the way. Literally credits you with making him a success today and your mentorship and support. It was like a Nick Jenkins interview. He was just basically talking about you for most of it. But I did find it fascinating. You know, talking to him to get to understand you. And one of the things he kind of talked about was how you hired him, and he was surprised. So, what is your hiring kind of mechanism? How do you decide? And he said he was surprised because he wasn't probably the most experienced, but you hired him anyway.
He wasn't the most experienced, but I looked at his track record. I looked at the things that he'd done, and he had a real entrepreneurial fire in him. And I look at someone, you know, he'd taken himself, aged 18, decided that his best future was to get to Britain and get an education there. He'd started off in dentistry. That was the one course he could get into, or dental, trained as a dental technician. I think it was a way of getting
making people smile is how he put it. Yeah.
He's very, very, and he fought for that. And I saw how much it must have taken for him to get from where he was to being a very smart, very presentable, got himself earned enough money to get to pay for an MBA course. He had a real fire about him. He's also incredibly bright as well. That's the other thing that's very clear is and I think if you start off with somebody who's incredibly bright and has a real fire in their belly, then everything else can happen after. The great thing about an MBA is if someone's done an MBA, you know the curriculum they've been through, so you know that they will understand the things you know what they know, what they will understand, and he picked things up incredibly quickly.
Yeah, it's just so nice to hear that you gave him so much time as well. I mean, it's just, you know, I think that's one of the things that I think more successful entrepreneurs could do. It's helping the next generation or helping people up. And like you say, another point I want my listeners to pick up on that you're talking about here, because a lot of my listeners feel this, is that it's not really about the network you have or even the money you have or where you've come from. It's that fire. It is that fire, and I think that is the key. The fact that Stefan actually, you know, worked hard to pay for his MBA was as impressive as the fact that he went for an MBA and understood it. And I think that's something you're highlighting there that's so important. But I think people would pick up on that are out there right now that think, I don't have that MBA. But if you go out there and hustle, you have that fire. People will help you and people will support you. Right? It's got nothing to do with your background other than that.
And that is important because if you've got the money, you can pay for an MBA. You will get an MBA. Hardly anybody who ever signs up for an MBA course and pays and buys their ticket doesn't get an MBA. The other thing is there isn't a grade of MBA. It's not you get a first, second, a first, second, two, you get an MBA. So the fact that somebody has an MBA doesn't in a sense say very much to me about whether they're any good. It tells me that they had enough money to go on the MBA. Now, when I discover that in fact they arrived in Britain with nothing and then made enough money to pay for the MBA, that's very different from someone whose parents sent them off to do an MBA. So it's you look for signs that people have fought hard to get to where they are. So but an MBA, I wouldn't. The great thing about MBA, it's a good thing to do if you're going to be an entrepreneur, and if you happen to have the spare time. I wish there was a slightly shorter course. Frankly, you can cram a lot of what you need to be an entrepreneur into 3 months of that. it gives a useful framework. But with that, you also need to have a sort of a commercial instinct, and that's one of the things that I would look for in people: is do they have a commercial instinct? Can they focus in on what really matters? And some people just can't. They just can't see it.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps one of the characteristics I look for in people that I invest in, or people that I want to come and work for me. Is can they look at a problem and get to the nub of it very, very quickly?
Again, I think for the audience picking up, you're talking about a lot of elements there that is just, you can't train those things. It's very hard to train those things. You can build on top of them. Once you've got the fire, you can build on top of it. If you don't have the fire, so it's all about igniting that fire, right? Maybe finding your purpose or finding what you love to do that's going to ignite that fire to make you passionate and make you...
Yes, I think the one thing that you can't... There's two things. One is the fire to do it, and then the other thing is the risk appetite. And you'll get two people coming out of an MBA course who know as much about business, but if you don't have the risk appetite, you'll probably become a management consultant. You're going to get paid whatever, and you can basically you can comment from the sidelines as a management consultant. As an entrepreneur, you have to take decisions that in the absence of perfect information, and that's perhaps the most important thing, is that you're very often looking at things thinking, I've got 70% of the answer, and I've just got to make a decision. Do I go with A or B? And your success is very much more about, it's not about, it's about the number of decisions that you can take. And provided that most of those decisions are right, they don't all have to be right. It's just that more have to be right than wrong. But if you don't take any decisions at all, it doesn't matter how bright you are. And that's one of the things I noticed about some of the people on my course on the MBA is that they would look at a problem and they will come up with a beautiful PowerPoint presentation with 6 possible solutions. But what they would never do is say, we don't know, but let's just go with this one. And I'm going to mortgage my house and take a step into the unknown. And some people are comfortable with that and some people are not. Some people like roller coasters, other people don't. So I think that's the bit that is perhaps innate in us and that you will never change. I do think that you can teach someone who has that. You can teach them quite a lot about how to be a more successful entrepreneur. And I would definitely credit my MBA course with, if I look at the way I set up Moonpig, it was probably more successful as a result of the training that I had. But were it not for the type of person that I am, I would never have started it.
Yeah, in part, what we're trying to do with the podcast is, the Purposeful Project platform that we run, is provide an MBA to people that can't afford it. And I think a lot of the knowledge you're sharing now is from your MBA through to building a business to that knowledge share is there actually a lot of the time online for free for people these days. It's just not necessarily in one easy to access place, right? But I think the problem with MBAs is the access quite often. I mean, Stefan is a unique case, but time and money isn't not always on people's side to go and get the knowledge that you're talking about.
And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of this, a lot of the information as well. And if you don't care about the qualification, and I don't particularly rate the fact that somebody, I don't think, because someone has an MBA that they're brighter or more talented than someone else. I just know what they've been exposed to. But if someone came to me and said, okay, well, this is the curriculum I've taken myself through online, and then that's just as good to me.
And the point you're making about risk is really important too. I totally see it in my own businesses. Whenever I'm involved in something, I'm all in. Any investment I make, if the people that I'm investing in aren't all in, then why should I? And quite often people will say, I've got some money saved up, but I'm keeping it, for myself, and I want to raise money from you because I want to risk your money. Well, that to me is a red flag, and I don't know how you feel about it, but a lot of the time people aren't all in, and they wonder why their businesses don't work.
Well, one of the common problems that I have now is I get approached by people who don't have any money because they're young, and they say, I want to start a business. Now here's my business idea, and it's brilliant, and I would like you to put the money in, and I'll give you 10% of my business. And I think, well, hang on, I'm putting all the money into this, and I'm getting 10%. But let's say, for example, you decide we get to a point where we're committed, we put £1 million, £2 million into this business, and we're all committed, and you decide, you know what, actually, I think I'm going to step back and do something. It's getting a bit difficult now. I'm going to do something else. That entrepreneur still has 90% of the business, and yet the people who put the money in need to protect their money, so they will have to find someone else to come in and run it. So I think sometimes some people they don't understand the whole sort of risk reward ratio. They expect too much at the beginning. But similarly, what I would do now with someone like that is I would say, fine, I'll put the money in on that valuation, but unless you're still actively involved in the business in 3 years, you have to basically sell your shares back. I need that. It's very hard to get real commitment from someone who has nothing, because if you have nothing and you end up with nothing, you're no worse off. Wow. But at the same time, it's unrealistic to expect that people who are 25, 26 have anything to risk.
I think
other than the future holding in their company.
Yeah, and I think it's such a valid point, and I want the listeners to pick up on this point, because I feel like it's actually not about money; it's about commitment. It's about that, and about that. I mean, I always think I'd rather personally own 50% of a successful business like Google than own 100% of a failure, right? So, I mean, in the end, equity is not really that important, but it certainly drives entrepreneurs. I mean, I had a 50-50 venture, for example. I was very happy with it, in part because of something you said earlier. Like that person worked just as hard as me in their own way, and we did that consistently together for 10 years. But to your point, there could have in any moment that person, if they weren't working on something, the resentment can build up. Like, why am I only 50%, but you're working, 20% as hard as me, right? But I think it's the all-in feeling that they put their reputation on the line. That this kind of like there is no plan B. I think is sometimes how it's explained in startup world, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the case of Moonpig, I'd invested by 2003. I think I'd invested pretty much all the money I had, and I made quite a reasonable amount of money in Russia. And when I came back from Russia, I had probably £1 million and a flat in London, and a nice flat in London with no mortgage. By the time Moonpig finally broke even, I had a flat mortgage to the hilt and no cash. So wow. I was all in. And there were plenty of times when, if someone had said to me, I can make all this go away as if it had never happened, and I would have willingly taken that. It's just that I was already so committed, I had no option, and that's what. And I remember that fight. That the reason I pushed on when things were difficult, when my own shareholders were saying to me, Nick, this is never ever going to make any money. This will never be a successful business. You need to give up now. I was deeply committed to it, and I fought. I didn't take a salary for 5 years. So I really, I was really committed. And if I hadn't been, then I don't think I would have fought as, I wouldn't have fought as hard for it. It probably would have failed.
It's so important, this point, and I thank you for sharing your story there as well. I've not heard that from you before, and putting all your hard-earned money. I mean, you worked in Russia when the Soviet Union crashed, right? Gorbachev was sacked while you were there. I mean, it must have been a pretty tough business experience, although probably also enjoyable.
It was a wild time. One of the most exciting times of my life. I mean, watching the largest country in the world just dissolve,
Unbelievable.
And then recreate itself in a new form. And it was utterly wild and very, very exciting. And also the other thing is I was very lucky. I learned Russian at university as a bilingual. I say bilingual. My Russian wasn't brilliant when I first arrived, but I was able to do business in Russian when I arrived, and reasonably fluent when I left. But everybody who was Russian who spoke English at the time when I first arrived there was probably in the KGB. So Western companies were reluctant to hire them. It's totally changed now, of course. But there was a period in the early 1990s when if you spoke Russian, you could be promoted way beyond your ability and experience. And so I benefited from that to some extent, and joined a company that I then ended up with a stake in, sold out of, which was Glencore. So that's what gave me the money at the beginning. And I don't underestimate actually the importance in Moonpig, the importance of me having a buffer of cash. I don't think Moonpig would have survived if I hadn't had that buffer of cash, because one, I was able to get the idea off the ground to the point that it was more than the idea on the back of an envelope when I went to raise money. And secondly, when there were difficult times, and there were several difficult times when I couldn't find anyone else to put money in, I put the money in myself. Every time I raised money, I put in my bit of that money. So I would say, look, I'm in this with you. This is my money. I'm writing this check. And that was very important in persuading my investors to follow on. And when they finally refused to follow on the last round of fundraising, it gave me enough to convince a new shareholder to come in. But when the founders, when none of the existing company are prepared to put any more money into a business, it's very hard for an incoming investor to say, well, why? Hang on, you all know about this business and you're not prepared to put any more money in, so why should I?
Yeah. You know, the thing about this, and I want my audience, I just don't want them to miss this, because I think what my audience might be hearing is, okay, you've got money, so you can put money in, that's fine. And I think people are missing the point if that's what they're hearing, because what is actually being talked about here is an example I had the other day. Someone said to me, oh, please invest in my business. I'm like, okay, sure, but let's just talk about your cost. Why do you need this salary you put into the business? And they're like, well, I've got a car loan and I've got this flat and I've got this. I'm like, can you live with your parents? I could, but I don't want to. Could you give up the car? I could, but I don't want to. You're like, okay, look, I'm not asking you to put lots of money in, but at least can you not take a lot of money out?
Yeah.
And
I've seen that a lot of my investees have taken. They recognise they've got nothing to put in themselves, but they are prepared to live like church mice for 2, 3, 4 years, right, as a sign of their commitment. And I think that's a really, really good point. I've never asked that question of anybody. Are you prepared to give up your car? But it's a good one, and I'll use that in the future.
Yeah, well, walking is good for you.
Yeah.
That's the upside.
I think it's just some sign that someone is prepared to recognise that in return for being given the opportunity, there's a massive upside in a business. They're prepared to show their commitment. The other really critical thing is I often get people coming to me and they say, and I realise they've got 2 businesses on the go.
Yeah.
Well, no, that does not work for me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because I spent a lot of time in China, and Jack Ma is a very successful entrepreneur out there, and he thought it was very clever to have Alibaba, which did really well, but then on the side he set up another company leveraging Alibaba's resources called Ant Finance, which just went IPO. Yeah. It was bigger than Alibaba, but none of the existing original shareholders, necessarily benefited from. So that's the other side, isn't it? And so you're talking about 2 things. I think we're talking about. One is that focus. Yeah. People think that, I'll do 2 or 3 things at once, and then if one of them comes off, isn't that smart? But they're probably missing, and hopefully by listening to what you're saying there, they're realizing actually that distraction is going to cause all of them probably to fail, or all of them to be average, and certainly for no one to want to back one because they feel that they're not getting all 3.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there were several points in Moonpig's history where I wasn't sure it was going to work. And had I had another business which was doing better, right, I would have been tempted probably to put my resources into that.
Yeah, plan B. Forget it. Yeah, it's so valuable an insight. Yeah, I think it's trying to understand. So Moonpig, you get it up and running. You put your own money in. Did you know you were going to spend this much money? Was it kind of a shock to you as you started investing in the business? Did it?
Of course not. I mean, if I thought I was going to invest every single penny I had, I would never have started. But no, I had an idea of. I thought I would invest a quarter of my resources into it, and that would raise the money, and we'd get it to a point where. No, it just doesn't work out like that. Nothing worked out. It's no battle plan survives the first volley.
But your business plan is the same. If I look back at your business plan in the early days and now, it's still pretty much the same. Your business plan did stand up. I mean, Mike Tyson's quote: "Everyone has got a plan till they get punched in the face," right? But I actually think your original plan is still the same.
The concept is the same. The concept that you can produce a single personalized greeting card using digital printing and the internet, that's very much the same. The margins are very much the same. How much? So when I did my first business plan at business school, I projected a business that would take an investment of £50,000. This was the first version of Moonpig. I put together a business plan that would take an investment of £50,000 and it would be worth £4 million after 5 years.
Easy.
In the end, I think it took £2.8 million of investment, but then it was, well, now it's floating for £1 billion. So some bits of it ended up being much, much bigger, but it also ended up costing much, much more. And I think part of that was that at the time, I probably could have started on a smaller budget and run on a smaller budget. What I also realized going into the year 2000, that there was an appetite on the part of investors for why fund something small when we could fund something big. And the thing about the internet is that it is a winner takes all environment. And so if you get there first and you do it best, then you will win. And that's proved to be the case. Although I think there have been 20 or 30 competitors of Moonpig, Moonpig still has 60% of the UK market.
I think that's incredible, by the way. And the other point here, the nuance of this, again, I would like the audience to kind of pick up on too, is that I think when you when you're building out a business, if you've got the resources to commit to making it work. For example, I was talking to a startup founder yesterday who is struggling to do all the different things in their business. And I'm like, okay, do you have money? Yes. Hire people. Oh, I don't want to risk the money. But then you can't scale. So people get caught in this, don't spend the money, keep it back, but then they don't scale. And then someone comes along and does it better than them or overtakes them or does invest in it, right? So it's kind of like that, back to that all in, but there's also an element of what I think what you're talking about there is you took your funds, you had this original plan, but that plan was just a shell, maybe to get you excited about doing it. And then the actual execution meant that, you had to hire people and you did that and you had the resources to do it, but you committed all that you had. I guess it would be interesting if you had, instead of $1 million in the bank and a London property, if you had $3 million in the bank and 2 London properties, would you have spent more quicker? Would it have been better for it or not as good for it?
Well, that's an interesting one. I tried to raise £5 million of venture capital at the very beginning of Moonpig, and I failed. I failed because I was doing it in the spring of 2000, and that was at the time of boo.com crashing. And then suddenly, venture capitalists no longer wanted to invest in B2C businesses. And that also probably saved me, because if you try to pump more money into a business than it can absorb, then you end up just simply overspending it. And there were a lot of businesses that did that. They took a vast amount of money, they overspent it, and they looked at the results at the end of 2 years, and they said, right, we now have a business that's only turning over £300,000. This isn't working, let's not carry on. I couldn't raise large amounts of money, so I had to make do on a much smaller budget. So we got it going. I mean, so it was 2.7 million over 4 years that it took to get it going. But we didn't. We weren't squandering money, and I'm sure that the danger is that when venture capitalists throw too much money at a small company, they start to waste it, and they throw large amounts of money at things that don't work. When you don't have very much money, which we didn't, we looked at all the different forms of customer acquisition, and we worked out mathematically how little do I need to spend on this channel in order to work out whether or not this channel works for me. Why spend £20,000 on a Facebook campaign to find out that it doesn't work when you could have spent £2,000 to find out that it doesn't work?
Right.
And so we were very ruthless in the way that the lack of money to some extent focused us on being very, very efficient about working out what to do.
It's a very interesting balance, isn't it, for the audience? Again, that's a really interesting balance between like having enough money that you can go out there and prove that it's a business that works. And I guess that the moment you brought in investors, they added value. You mentioned this earlier. So you kind of wanted them to come in. If you'd had more money to spend on it on your own, again, maybe it wouldn't have been the success that it was, right? So there's an interesting nuance there.
Investors hold you to account, and they were very. All of my investors were very useful. Every single one of my investor directors, and I had 4 or 5 of them, every single one of them did something or said something at some point during the first 4 years that stopped the business from going under. One person suggested a price rise from $1.99 to $2.99. Another person brought in a critical investor at an important point. That investor then subsequently persuaded me to move away from only selling humorous cards and to introduce non-humorous cards, Steerix cards, which ultimately, if I'd stuck with humorous cards, it would have restricted the size of the business to a third of what it is. So every single one of them had done something really important and added something. And the other thing that they did is they held me to account. I had a bunch of directors at the beginning who were actually were lovely people, very supportive, but probably maybe overindulgent and didn't push me too much on producing management accounts and cash flows. The last guy that came in was a real stickler for monthly management accounts and holding me to account every month, which I first of all found very irritating. But after a while, I found it. I before a board meeting or before a presentation of accounts, I would meticulously go through them, because the thing there was a little bit of friction between us, this investor and me, and I hated him proving me wrong. So I would meticulously make sure there wasn't even a typo in my accounts. He came up with an interesting point. He picked out a typo in an Excel spreadsheet, and I said, well, it doesn't affect the numbers. He said, I know, but if you couldn't spot that typo, then you probably didn't then you wouldn't have spotted a formula error in somewhere else in the spreadsheet. So the absence of typos to me is an indication of the thoroughness of the piece of work.
I love it.
That's a lesson I learned from him, and I follow that through now. When people have sloppy spreadsheets they send to me for management accounts, I say, it's important. The attention that you show this is an indication of the attention that you showed to the numbers and the formulae and the thought process behind it.
It's, again, such a kind of gem of an insight for people that are thinking about starting a business, or, for that matter, anyone even applying for a job. We just put a job advert out with thousands of applicants. Some people like, dear sir, dear madam, they haven't even taken the time to actually realize who they're applying to, and that detail then filters through into everything. But there's so many bits here that I think are important to just highlight. I think there's a culture right now, a headline every day, this company raised 100 million, Gymshark just raised millions, and all these big title numbers coming up, and that's blowing entrepreneurs' minds and making them think that they should be doing the same. But raising money is not the point, right? And I have also seen a huge amount of businesses that fail because they had too much money, and worse, I've seen businesses fail because they weren't in touch with their clients enough, for example, because they had too much money. So in other words, they had a layer of people that were actually dealing with the business, and they put themselves in an ivory tower because they had the money. Your example you just mentioned there about your pricing, for example, if you had money, you may have kept at $199 just to be competitive with the market, and you might have never taken that chance to jump to $299.
Yeah.
Right? That is a classic example of actually why it's good to not have money, I think.
There was a really important lesson for me in that pricing thing. When I was doing my MBA, one of the things that I remember from that course was the importance of pricing and how the psychology of pricing. That sometimes you take examples of management consultants who a management consultancy who made more money when they put their daily rate up, because people assume that because you're charging £1,000 a day, you must be twice as good as the guy who charges £500 a day. Yep. There's no correlation there, but you do make more money. And when I set that price of $199, it's because I personally had this idea that that's how much a card would have cost unpersonalized in the shop. And I thought, if I offer it the same price as the shop, but it's a better product because it can be personalized, that would be the right price. The truth is, I was setting the price for the whole market. Nobody else had set the price because it was a very nascent market. Nobody else was doing it. And I was very lucky that I managed to change the price from $199 to $299 while I was still the person setting the market, because everybody else then followed Moonpig. What's interesting that happened with Greets in the Netherlands is that they set their price at €1.99 and didn't change it until lots of other competitors had come in and followed at €1.99, by which point it was too late for them to change the price. And as a result, they had 65% of the market, but they didn't make any money.
Yep. And then you could become like a zombie company. You're there working hard and making nothing.
But the difference that it makes to profitability, when you look at, say, he's charging £1.99, and the cost of the card is the same. So the cost of the card was sort of 80p all in, let's say, and it was charging $150. If you move the price to $2.99, that's all extra. That's £1 of extra profit. It tripled our gross the amount of money we were making per card.
Now, I think that I did my research on you, and one of the things I like about this story that I think I want the audience to also know about is that in a way you also you took that decision with the mindset that we'll lift the price and the business fails, it fails. If we don't lift the price, the business fails anyway. So let's go for it. A lot of people out there I know have businesses right now that are struggling for one reason or another because they haven't added a zero to the end of their pricing. And if they don't do it, they're going to die. But they're scared to do it because they think they're not competitive. But if you don't do it, you're going to die. And going for it and risking it all, back to the point earlier, right? That's a nuance, I think, of what you did that's quite important too.
Yeah, I think the other thing is being decisive. If you've got to take a decision, take it early. It's when you're running out of money and you know that you're going to have to let some people go, bite the bullet early, because so many people just hold off and hold off and hold off, and then it's too late.
I've made that mistake myself. I know what you mean. Letting people go is always the hardest as well. That's such a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah, though I did learn relatively early on that it isn't my responsibility to feed people. It's my responsibility to give them an opportunity to be productive in my company. They can't be productive in my company. Those people will be productive in someone else's company.
Right.
And so
you're doing them a favour. You're doing them a favour sometimes. Yeah.
The one thing I do feel very strongly about is that if I'm going to let someone go, you give them a reasonable notice period and make sure they're paid. The worst thing of all is crashing a business and then not being able to pay people their notice period. Yep, totally. And it really irritates me when companies go down and they haven't had that conversation about how much money do we need in the bank to be able to pay everybody properly if we shut this down. What they do is they just keep on driving at 100 miles an hour until they crash into a wall, and then they turn to everybody who's loyally worked for them and say, I'm sorry, but I can't pay your salary at the end of the month.
It's because I think there's a bit like we're saying about, the headlines, raise lots of money and, and that's the way. There's tread on people, get ahead. There's a lot of this business stuff that's just rubbish. And I think one of them is, the last phone call you make will get you the money you need to go right to the edge. But I think the bit that's missing from that advice, let's call it, that's out there is that, do the right thing by your people, however. So where's the edge? I remember someone who actually I really like, so I don't want to say anything bad about them, but they opened up Krispy Kremes in China. And they opened it up about 200 stores all at once, and Krispy Kremes was everywhere. And it didn't work. It failed quite dramatically, and I know why it failed. It failed because Krispy Kreme's too sweet for the Chinese palate. But unfortunately, when it collapsed, all the landlords, which some people don't realise, sometimes landlords have bills to pay too, right? Alongside the staff, all were not paid. And it was almost like, well, that we tried to do something and it didn't work. And it was totally out of character for the person I'm talking about, actually, because they're really good business people. But I think in a way you get infected by this, I guess, hunger or incorrect training that, you should stop 30 days before you run out of money, actually, because you've got to do the right thing. But I think that's missing.
I'm a real stickler for this in the businesses that I'm involved in as an investor, that in our management accounts, we have a page, which is, I always insist we have a page of shutdown costs. So we work out how much money, what the notice period for every member of staff is, how much money we would have to pay to landlords, and everything else that we owe. And that tells us how much money we need to have in the bank, below which we would have to have a discussion about whether or not this is a going concern. Because the point at which you want to shut down a business is the point at which you can shut it down in an orderly manner, pay everybody off, and just dissolve it. Okay, not everything works, and I accept that not everything works. But if you keep on going beyond that point, if you shut the business down, then you are going to have to let somebody down. And or someone's going to have to write a check in order to be able to shut it down in an orderly manner. And I never want any company that under my control ever to go down owing anybody any money, because it's completely avoidable.
Yep, totally. I mean,
but entrepreneurs, of course, are always the ones who will, they've already put all of their money into it, and they will keep on driving at that brick wall until they hit it at 100 miles an hour. And it's down really to the investor directors to say, actually, you know what, if we're not going to make it, now is the point that we need to have that discussion. The point at which we can still afford to pay our staff.
I hope people are listening to this. People are looking for money from people like Nick Jenkins. Listen to what actually matters. Like take out that exit slide and put down shutdown cost slide.
Yeah,
that would say a lot about someone, wouldn't it? That'd say a lot more about someone than an exit slide.
But it's shocking how much money you do need to exit to shut a business down in an orderly manner. Because it also then makes you think about the terms on which you employ. But if you're having a startup, don't give people 6-month notice period in their contract because as a startup, you can't afford that. If you don't know that you're definitely going to survive, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you can't honour your commitments. And so although it seems very, I'm sure there are plenty of people who love to be all lovely and cuddly and furry to their staff at the beginning, and therefore they give, you can have as much holiday as you like, and we'll give you 6 months notice and so on and so on. That's all very well to say that on paper. But when you're in trouble, 6 months worth of salaries is a lot of money to have in reserve before you shut the business down. So I'm very careful to make sure that I don't make promises I can't keep.
It's interesting you mentioned something earlier that I just want to go back to for a second. You mentioned, you screw a customer once, they won't come back. I wonder if that's changing. I see how Facebook's treated its customers, for example, and sold data and not had a problem. I was just reading about Topshop and what's happening there. They had the gift vouchers, and as soon as they went into bankruptcy, the gift vouchers were only valid if you spent double the money. The customers were still going in, and instead of having a gift voucher for £20, they had to spend 40 to get the 20. But that wasn't the original. It was given to them as a gift, right? So it was not, here's a gift for £20, but only if you go and spend £20 in the store. So the whole. But I feel like people are still going they're still loyal to Facebook, for example. They're still using Facebook. So do you think that's changing?
They're not loyal. They just continue. I mean, people still fly on Ryanair. Whereas Ryanair's great. Their CEO used to really annoy me the way that he would say, it's actually I can stand at the top of the ladder as people get into plane and spit in their face, and they will still fly Ryanair.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's that Trump. I can stand in New York City, shoot someone, and I still get elected. I mean, it's just it's total disrespect for the client, isn't it?
But it's not that I have any loyalty to Ryanair. It's just that some people look at their wallets and they think, yes, okay, but if you're that mean to me, you're going to have to be really cheap for me to overcome my objections to being to giving you any money. So Yes, you won't lose all of your customers, but you won't have any. That's not loyalty. That's just a price choice.
Well, that's free. That's the trick of free too. I mean, not that Ryanair's free, but sometimes they pitch it as £1 to go there, here and there. But of course, it's the power of free which Facebook kind of pitches. But it is definitely interesting, the whole the business modelling, I guess. What do you think of this? Everything's free. The internet's free. I mean, even doing a podcast, it's funny. People are like, it doesn't cost you anything to do a podcast. I've got 4 people working on this. This costs money to produce.
I think somewhere along the line, the business model got skewed way back in early 2000s when people decided that things that could be downloaded ought to be free. And it's caused a real problem. If you look at app developers, you think about the number of the millions of man years of development that goes into developing apps that are then given away for free. And people expect apps to be free, and then they get a little bit miffed when they're asked to pay for something. But if you don't pay for something, who's going to pay to develop these things? I think what will happen is that so many people have gone into this thinking, okay, if I develop it and give it away for free, I'll worry about monetizing it later. And that's fine if you happen to be one of the 1 in a million business that makes it through and survives and gets big enough, like Tinder, for example. But what it means is that thousands of businesses go under. Trying to get there, and eventually everybody works out. You know what? I'm very skeptical of app development. If that app is not going to be paid for from the beginning, and I'm not going to have I can't see a revenue model from the very, very beginning, because I've just seen too many apps being developing a really wonderful product that people want and people want to use, but nobody wants to pay for. I invest on Dragon's Den. I invest in a business called Double, which is a double dating app. And it was a brilliant concept, very successful. We had whole clusters of people dating all over Britain on this thing. Basic concept was that you would go on this with a friend of yours and say a pair of guys would meet up with a pair of girls for a drink. And it was kind of safety in numbers to some extent. And also, that there's going to be a bit of banter because you're there with your mate. And it's all a bit more relaxed rather than one person facing another person across the table they don't know. So it was very popular as a concept. But it started out as freemium, and we just never managed to get anybody to pay for it. So it was successful. And one of the lessons I've learned now is that not only do I want to work out, do people want this product, but are they willing to pay for it? And it's like paying for news. I don't mind paying for news because I know at some point somebody has to pay a journalist to go out and dig up new news. A lot of other news services will merely collect whatever news is available from other people's journalists and repackage it and spit it out. But at some point, somebody needs to pay for a journalist, much the same as someone needs to pay for as you say, for your team to put this together. It's content. It costs money.
I think there's such a deep subject here, and what I kind of sum it up as, if we don't fix this problem, you end up with companies winning who are doing evil things with your data, because that's the only way they can pay the bills. And so
you're right. I mean, ultimately, it's a bit like with influencers. Eventually, they to put the time and effort in, they need to put their promotions in, and I don't have a problem with the idea of free content paid for by my willingness to watch adverts, for example. We had ITV. I was a child growing up. We had ITV for years. Fine, free content, and we have to watch some adverts.
Yeah.
But I do think that eventually people who are thinking about developing apps will look at the track record of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of businesses that have started trying to do something that have gone under, wasting lots of man hours, and people won't be prepared to do it for free anymore.
Yep. And I think also the problem with the way free is operated right now, and then people monetize it on the back end, when people do things genuinely for free, there's almost like, what's the catch? There's become a cynicism. So you've got half the people don't even realize they're getting robbed. And then, like, for example, we offer free help, one-on-one sessions to help people with entrepreneurship. At the beginning, they're like, first of all, it's got no value because it's free, right? And then you have to actually deliver it to then prove it has value at the end. But there's also like skepticism. Okay, so what are you going to do now? Like, sell my data to someone? Like, suddenly if you want to do philanthropic things, you want to give education for free, for example, there's almost like a commercial back end that you're also fighting against. I mean, that's one of my problems with the education system, especially the private school sector. There is almost like a push against anything that might possibly be free and give people that can't afford an education at private school level free education, because that would affect their monetary rewards, right? But so there's this. I actually think we're fighting for the fabric of how business is done through these new business models right now.
Yeah, well, people expect free banking, but then they complain, and so the banks respond to that by saying, fine, okay, we'll give you free banking. Clearly, you've got to support the bank somewhere. And then they say, well, my bank, it's very difficult to get through to my bank, and I can't find anyone to speak to. Well, of course not, because they've got no money. If you're not prepared to pay for banking, they have no money whatsoever to pay for the staff to. So talking about being interrupted by 3-year-olds.
No problem. I'm at the library today to avoid my 3-year-old doing the same. So absolutely great. You're like me. We had children late in life. This is another thing I like to talk about when founders are listening in. Like my brother was 19 when he had his first child. He had 2, and a lot of the time he complained that he couldn't go and do his business and do stuff that he wanted to do, and he somewhat resentful. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that today. He's somewhat resentful that he had to give up a lot of his freedom to look after his children. You've done it the same as me. We kind of a little bit later in life had children. What's your experience with that? Good way around to do it, you think?
Well, I'm very glad I started a business when I didn't have any dependents.
Yeah, I don't know how people do it. I some sort of award people need.
Now I know how difficult being a parent is, and how time consuming it is, and it's it's not surprising that a lot of people get to a point in their life when they get married, they have a child, and making the leap of becoming an entrepreneur is too much.
Yeah, you have to extinguish the fire a little bit, I guess. I feel it. I mean, I had my 3-year-old this morning, Daddy, let's go out and play. I'm like, nope, got to go interview Nick Jenkins, sorry. I was like, what? Who? Why? It's very hard to explain, right? It's hopefully you'll listen to this in 10 years' time.
And it's funny because occasionally you see stories in newspapers when some business tycoon is getting divorced, and they say that the family provided the support to enable them to focus on the business. It's a lot easier to do without a family. Much easier. You have no one else to think about. The most important thing is that it's very easy to shrug off your own misfortune. I'm quite philosophical about it. I sort of think, well, if I was reduced to zero, if I lost everything on my own, I'd find a way. I'd see it as a new challenge, to be honest. I think, well, okay, I've got a decent brain. I can figure something out. I'll be fine. I didn't worry about that at all. It's harder when you have to turn to your family and say, I'm terribly sorry, but because I messed up at work, we're going to have to move out of this lovely house and go into a cardboard box. And you're going to have to change school, and we can't buy you any new clothes.
Totally.
That is tough.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, that's the sticking there I want people to pick up on is that, do it while you're young, do it while you haven't got the responsibilities. I think sometimes when people have the responsibilities, that sometimes when the fire comes, because then they've got to provide, and it's not just about getting enough money for the weekend and going out anymore, and it is about providing. Then they want to earn, but in a way, you've got to act like, I think, that you've got that all coming when you're young, before you've got it all coming. And so
I agree. And you were saying earlier about that question you asked of somebody: are you prepared to live with your parents for a bit? Well, actually, when you're younger, you can afford to live on next to nothing.
Yep.
If you're working all the hours that God sends anyway. You're not spending any money. So it's that, and if everything goes wrong, the end is not much worse than where you started.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. You can learn a lot of lessons when you're young. But if you start a business when you're young, even if it doesn't work, you'll learn enough about doing it that the second time you do it, you'll do it better. But
the point I would like to add to what you've said as well, I think is really important, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I think that I've got a 3-year-old, you've got a 3-year-old. I think when you have a child, what I've noticed is actually my child doesn't give a shit where he lives. He can tell if I'm happy or not. I never lie to him. If he says, "Are you okay, Daddy?" and I'm not feeling great, I tell him the truth because he can tell. So he'll just doubt me if I tell him I'm fine, and he knows it's not true. So I never lie. But he can tell. And I think, if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing every day, if I'm not fulfilled, the money in the bank, frankly, the nice school, the house, none of it will matter. So, people out there that do have kids, I still think it's, worth going for it. Like if you can get your partner on board to risk it all, it's still worth going for it, and make sure that you fill your own bucket, because that will ultimately, I think, project into your children. Do you agree?
No, I completely agree. I think the other problem with children, it's one issue that you have as an entrepreneur, if you get more successful, is you look at your children and you think, well, if you grow up with all of this and you think that's normal, happiness in a sense is a comparison of what you're used to with what you've got now.
Yeah.
And so the more you provide when your child is young, the more you're setting them up for disappointment later on.
Yeah.
Because they get a sense that there's a danger that they get a sense of entitlement that, well, this is what's normal. It's
Yeah.
to live in a
I
nice
have
house,
that with my son already. You know, every day he's like, "Can I get a book, Daddy?" I'm like, you know, no, but he gets, you know, definitely. It's so true. I mean, I just said to my crew here before the podcast, I'm going to make sure I spend all my money before I die and not necessarily leave it to my son, because I don't think, I think it's good. Like you said earlier, it's good to actually have nothing, realize that's not the end of the world, actually realize that that's not what's important anyway, and kind of build up from that point. I'm not saying my mother kicked me out at 15. I wasn't happy at the time, but I actually thank her now. You know, it kind of woke me up to the real world, and I couldn't agree more.
You know, similarly, I mean, when I left school I took a year off between school and university, and went off to I went off to London on my own. I got myself a job. I found myself a flat, and I look back now, and of course, to me, that seemed perfectly normal. But I look back now at other 18-year-olds. And whose parents would have gone down to find them a flat, would have paid the rent and so on. But that year of complete financial independence, where I went off, made my own money, covered my own costs, stood me in really, really good stead. But I mean, I didn't think about it. I just thought, well, that's what I've got to do. No one else is going to pay for it, so that's what I've got to do. And so I think that's you're right, that having to do something is an important part of growing up as an individual.
Totally. I'm going to ask you a question now that I didn't give you in advance, and we can cut this out if you feel uncomfortable answering it. But I was reading on Wikipedia that you took home from Moonpig sale £42 million, but your net worth is £150 million. So what did you do between then and now? How did you grow your net worth? What's your
insight? That's journalism for you. I wish I had a net worth of 150 million, but I don't. No, the 42 million was correct.
Wikipedia's got it wrong again.
I mean, to be honest, I haven't read. I don't like looking at things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because they even have all the dragons on Dragon's Den. They've actually listed them in like value order. And I think Deborah Meaden will be annoyed. Let's just say that, you know, like it's put them in order of net worth, which I thought
I said no. I mean, I need to correct. I don't know. I've never got involved with correcting it. It's a bit annoying when people come out. That was how much the business was sold for, but it's not how much I got out of it.
Right.
The 42 was correct.
Right. No, it's just fascinating, isn't it? How it's also, again, it's the media a little bit spinning things, but equally, I mean, I'm not just saying this. You're definitely one of my favourites on Dragon's Den. Why did you stop Dragon's Den out of interest?
Well, there were two things behind it. One was that it was great fun doing it for 2 years. Really, really good fun. But you do take on quite a lot of businesses, and the problem is they're all quite small. They're quite small businesses, and they're not businesses that financially they're not going to change my life. But the commitment that you're putting into that is actually stopping you from doing other more important things. So I probably spend my time about 50-50 split between doing non-profit things and for-profit. But what I realized is I wanted to spend more time on fewer, bigger investments rather than lots and lots of things. The other problem is that in Dragon's Den, you have to invest across a wide variety of sectors. And that actually makes no sense as an investment thesis, because what I've realized over time is that the reason why when you see a business in a sector that you don't understand, they will always be more appealing because you don't know why they're going to fail. Whereas when you know something about a particular sector, all the experience of the other businesses that you've looked at feed in, and you think, right, okay, I know where I can add value, or I know if this is going to work or not. So that was part of it. I think the other thing was that they like a change every once in a while. Sarah had to leave anyway. She was spending too much time with her children, and they normally want two people to go, and I was kind of ready to go at that point.
I was always waiting for you two to start a business, because there was definitely you had the similar mindset and always had the similar thinking.
And Sarah
invested
and I
into business
we got on very well. We did a business together, Sublime Science. We did together.
Okay. You invested in two companies together as well, right?
Just the only one that went through, which was Sublime Science.
Oh, okay. Two on the show, but one that went through. Okay.
Yeah. But I really enjoy working with Sarah. Our minds work very similarly. I really enjoyed working with Deborah as well. I would have loved to have done a business with Deborah. She is a wonderful person.
Yeah, I follow her on Twitter and pretty much want to retweet everything she says.
Really. I think the bit that Dragon's Den never gets over is actually quite what a sort of a very kind and funny person she is. She's a very deeply principled person, which is the thing I love about her. But she's also very funny, and we had a great laugh together.
No, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting model. I guess that there is an element of me that wants to update Dragon's Den because it does project this kind of, let's call it dragons versus the startup, which often isn't the case, right? It's very much teamwork. I mean, it's not, I'm taking 50% of your company and now, but if you do that, you own the company. To your point earlier, some of those investments on there, sometimes I cringe because I feel like it's projecting slightly the wrong image, because it's like you take 50% of someone, like you said earlier, you actually long term, as they dilute, you're disenfranchising them.
You end up owning. And there's one lesson. One of the other reasons for stopping is that it basically breaks a number of my angel investing rules. The one rule that I've set up now is that I don't want to be more than 20% of the money. And the reason for that is that if you're the only person with money investing in a business, when it needs more money, if you don't invest, you're killing it.
Right.
And sometimes there are times when I've just lost interest in a business. I don't particularly want to do it. I don't like working with the person anymore. And I don't, not that I think the business idea is wrong. It's just that I don't want to put any more money into it. And but I also don't want to be the person that turns the life support off.
I've seen it. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen this exact scenario play out, and where they've got a majority shareholder, and for whatever reason, that majority shareholder doesn't want to. And the problem is, the other investors that could come in are nervous. Why would this person who's known you so long and invested in this business at the beginning not want to follow on? That's a big problem for the new investor coming in.
So my rule of not being more than 20% of the money means that if I fall out and don't go into a new round, but the other four do, fine, everything carries on. If all of us decide not to follow on, then obviously there was a good reason for it. But at least I'm not in this position. And it's even worse. I mean, I have a number of rules about investing. One is that I don't invest in friends and family business, because it always ends. It's awkward when it comes to the follow-on, because inevitably all businesses need more money later on.
Yeah. Sunday lunch gets awkward, doesn't it? Like, why, pass the gravy, and why didn't you pass me the money to make my business survive? It definitely.
Because you'll always disagree about whether or not the business is going to survive at a later point, and it's a hard discussion to have.
Totally.
The other thing I've noticed in Dragon's Den is people not asking for enough money. And you think, I'm only asking for £20,000. I know, but I know that your business will need £1 million to do it. And if I'm a 30% shareholder, that means I'm following on pro rata for £300,000, and I don't want to do that. So it's it was great fun. I think Dragon's Den is a wonderful program. In the sense that it makes the whole process very real and understandable. These are real businesses set up by real people, and it's real money that we're investing. So it's a lot more real than The Apprentice. Yep. But the choice of companies that come on it and it means that you. It does get sort of slightly oversimplified. The bit that I often struggle with is when people poo-poo the valuations of companies. And I often imagine if I had gone on to Dragon's Den with Moonpig in year 2, and I said, look, I'm looking for some money. That's great. Okay, so what revenue did you make last year? £90,000. What was your gross margin? £45,000. Okay, how much money did you make? We lost 1.1 million. Okay, and how much do you value the business at? 3 million.
Yeah. Embarrassment all round, right? There'd be no's, and the public would know. It'd all be egg on the face, wouldn't it?
But I mean, the thing is that they would have, if I'd gone on with that proposition 2 years into starting Moonpig, I would have been laughed out of Dragon's Den by someone like Peter Jones, because my valuation was ridiculous. But I did raise money at a valuation of £3 million, and those people made 60 times their money.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, this is my problem with Dragon. I go off and on the show. I mean, I love it and I don't love it. I mean, I like it because it raises awareness of entrepreneurship, but I also don't like the fact that it's kind of made people think that I've got a business idea, I'll just go raise money, and then sell 50% of the company and realize that actually now they're working for that person, really. They don't own it. And this, the interesting thing here, the other thing I want to make sure I don't forget to say, that your history, when you sold your business Moonpig to Photobox, the thing I read about was that there was an earlier meeting that you had with the founders of Photobox where you wanted a lot more money than they were asking, but they ended up paying a lot more money than you were asking back then, right? So that's a point about valuation that's pretty interesting there too. Your experience of selling the company, what was that like?
It was an interesting one. I mean, ours was Moonpig was a very, very conservative valuation, in the sense that we were making a lot of money. We were making, I think, I forgot, was 11 or 13 million profit, which is something that doesn't, not EBITDA, profit. And that's
such an old word now, isn't it? Profit.
I feel very old-fashioned when I talk about pre-tax profit. No one ever talks about pre-tax profit, but EBITDA hides a multitude of sins. And we were paying dividends of £12 million a year at the point that we sold Moonpig. So when we sold it for 100, we'd taken 30 million out of dividends, but we sold for 120. It was a modest. I think it was 11 times pre-tax profit, which is actually a very sensible, conservative valuation. I now see, when I see businesses trading for 200 times their revenue, it blows my mind.
You sold it too cheap then, basically. You should have waited a few years till models got out of control.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that question, though. You reach a point with a business where you think, okay, so we're doing really, really well now, but there's a whole load of things that can happen that could stop us. And if I sell now, it's enough money. It's enough money for me to do whatever I want to do in my life. But if I don't sell, and everything falls off a cliff, and I end up with nothing, I'm going to start all over again. So that was the support, and it enabled me to go off and do lots of other really interesting things. So people will often, particularly in the light of Moonpig floating for $1 billion now, I'm sure people will say, "Oh, don't you wish you would have hung on to it?" But it would have stopped me. It would have prevented me from doing all the other interesting things that I've done in the last 10 years.
I think this is really an important point too. A lot of our listeners aren't just people that want to start businesses; they're people that have businesses, and sometimes people get trapped in their businesses. They think, they actually don't love them anymore, but that's what they've got. So they're kind of just like working for someone. They end up kind of in a trap. And I think what you're talking about there is it's important to highlight. You can sell it. You can quit. Yeah, you might not make a fortune from it, but there's other things you can do.
The other thing is I need to be excited about the things that I'm doing. Right. And I Moonpig was a great business and I loved it. And I loved the team there. And that's perhaps the one thing I do miss is having is actually the team of going into the office. There's a whole bunch of people that I've chosen. They're my team, and we work together, and it's great fun. But I did feel as though I'd added everything I could add to Moonpig, and so me staying on was much more a question of a lack of imagination than anything else. Whereas I left and I went into the charity sector for a while. Went off, became the CEO of a charity. That was a whole other learning curve. I think what I've learned since then is that once you've made a certain amount of money, buying stuff doesn't really. Buying stuff is more attractive when you haven't got the money to buy it. But actually, when you can have the stuff, you just stop buying stuff. But the one thing you can never tire of is learning. And I went into the charity sector and it was a fascinating education. I have a second MBA, but in development. And that's a whole experience that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't sold.
I mean, the business modeling in the charity sector is crazy. It's just all on its head. I'm getting into it now with the library. It's just everything's reverse engineered from the grants that people get, for example, as opposed to like thinking about client first. It's kind of completely opposite to business. There's
an element of craziness about it. The other difficulty is that it makes you realize how simple it is to measure the performance of a business, because you have this one. At the end of it, you can work. I could compare a spanner company with a soft drinks company and work out which is a better company. But you could take, say, two children's charities, Barnardo's and NSPCC, and look at their annual reports. And there's very little in their annual reports that would be able to tell you whether or not they're actually having more of an impact, which is more efficient as a charity in terms of impact. But because simply how much money they raised or how much money they spent is not an indicator of whether or not they were successful. So and I would never have learned that if I hadn't sold and gone off to do something else. It's all worked out. I'm very pleased that it's carried on well. Going back to that idea about the best deals are deals that work out for both sides. When you sell a company and then, if you manage to get a fantastic price, but then it dribbles off and dies the next year, that's not something to be proud of. Totally. Whereas actually, when both parts come away thinking the person who bought it from me is very happy with the purchase, and I was very happy with it too. So
I think the same motto applies for like raising money. And again, people think in my audience trying to raise money. It's not necessarily just about you getting the best deal for you. It is. I guess making your investor feel part of it, for example, making them feel that there's value both sides to be brought to the table other than money, which I think is sometimes overlooked.
Yeah, and one thing that people often don't take into consideration is if you raise money for a small business that's losing money and you manage to raise money at a pre-money valuation of £10 million, if you don't deliver a business, say someone comes to offer you £8 million for the business, which might be a perfectly decent deal for you, that's a loss for your investor. That happened in one of my investee companies recently. They raised money on Crowdcube at a valuation of 10 million. And to be honest, I thought the business was worth less. But and the problem is that you've got a whole bunch of investors who come in at one level, and they're not going to be happy unless you manage to do better than that. So it's always very hard to go back to shareholders. You've done a deal, you've sold the company, you've made a lot of money, and your investors have actually lost money.
I'd just like to ask you a few more questions before
Sure.
we end. I noticed that you're impact investing, but what does Nick Jenkins' day look like now? What's keeping you busy? What are you thinking about? What's happening in the future for you?
Well, so I've got a portfolio of I think 19 businesses. Only 2 or 3 of them which I sit on the board. I mean, my view about sitting on the board is that I will only sit on the board of a company if I have a really large stake, and I need to make sure that I'm seeing what's going on, or need to have an influence on it. Other than that, my view is that if a company wants to listen to what I've got to say, then it doesn't really matter if I'm a director or not. They can listen to what I've got to say and take it to the board themselves. And if they don't want to listen to what I've got to say, then it doesn't really matter if I'm on the board or not. But if I'm on the board, and this is an important thing I've learned as an investor, if my name is on the board, I then have the responsibility to fight tooth and nail to keep that company alive. If I'm just a shareholder and things start to go awry, I have the option of just saying, didn't work, wander off. So I've often found I'm very wary about joining the boards of companies. So I'm on the board of 2 or 3 companies, and though I've got investments in 19, and I advise those. So I tend to spend a fair bit of my time advising them, and also looking at new potential investments. I don't do that many this year. I'm trying to trim my portfolio down, and then the other half of my time I spend on the charity sector. I'm a trustee of an African surgical charity, and I'm also a trustee of a multi-academy trust in South London, and a group of 9 schools, and so that takes up a fair amount of time as well. And it's a good balance. It's an interesting balance. Though what I've learned is that doing 10% of 10 things is a lot more work than doing 100% of one thing.
Do you think you'll go back to 100% of one thing at some point? Is it glitter?
No, I don't think I will. I think I might go back to doing 25% of 4 things, or even 3 things. But I like the variety. I like the hot, cold, sweet, sour variety of doing different things. And also the other thing is the freedom to be able to stop and take on interesting projects. I'm in the middle of a big project to make my house in the country completely green and fossil fuel free at the moment. So
yeah, I was reading about that. That's amazing. Yeah, that's
learning all about. So at the moment I've got a drilling rig in the garden, drilling enormous boreholes down to suck the heat out of the earth.
Right at the core of the earth, get the heat out of the earth. That's an energy
source.
Very
right long there. Drill.
There's a startup idea right now. We want energy. We're trying to get it from the sun, but just tap into the core. There you go.
Well, of course, in Bath you can do that. It's quite close to the surface.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think just to wrap up, your future feelings on certain technologies like AI and these things. I mean, I see huge opportunity in ed tech. I see huge opportunity in AI. What's your view? What do you see in the future coming that people perhaps should give a bit more attention to?
Well, AI is a very, very broad thing, which for me in particular covers the impact on education. So one of the other companies I'm involved in is an African education business, it's an ed tech business, and that has enormous potential to transform education, particularly in low-income countries, where you have the luxury of being able to pay a very highly trained, motivated teacher to sit in front of the class. You're better off doing that. But there's a lot of technology that can enable that teacher to teach well. And in an area where you don't have highly trained teachers, that becomes much, much more important. So I think for me, that's one of the areas. I don't know whether it's necessarily an easy way to make money, but I do think it's going to be an area which will develop very quickly. More so, I think, post-COVID, as everyone realizes that we need to, as everyone's got used to the idea of using tech in education. So that's very important. I think med tech as well is another area I've invested in, where the latest investment I made was a company called Arthronica, where they've developed a way of having remote consulting sessions using AI to measure movement in people's hands, to measure movement of joints, and otherwise they would have to go to see a rheumatologist, which might be a half day out of their day or a day out of their day to go in for this check to be measured. But it makes life much, much easier for the rheumatologists, and it can all be done from home. and it's all considerably cheaper. So the things like that are going to make an enormous difference to the efficiency of our lives. But AI covers an enormous amount of most of the developments will come using AI, I imagine.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit like blockchain. It's going to become quite mainstream, really, isn't it? These things. It's not going to be a question of whether you've got a website or not.
It's mainstream already, and it's one of those things. It's a bit like there was a difference between internet businesses and non-internet businesses, and now every business is on the internet. Every retail, every shop, virtually every shop except Primark, I think, has a web presence. So it just becomes a natural part of it's a part of the plumbing.
Yep, totally. Well, look, Nick, you've given so much of your time to me and the audience. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Just end with one last question, which is if you went back to your younger self and gave some advice, what would it be?
Yeah, good question. I didn't see that. Oh, yes, that is in the bottom of this. I think that the important thing is to enjoy the journey rather than looking forward to the end. And that's something I really enjoyed running Moonpig. It wasn't, but too many people look at their company as a lot of pain they've got to go through before the exit. But the exit can sometimes be a bit of an anticlimax, and so you get very well rewarded. But then the question is, well, what next? And so enjoying the journey itself is a really important thing. I think on balance, I've done that. I've enjoyed it as I went along. But the other really important thing is you never get tired of learning.
Well said. The enjoy the journey bit, I just can't say it enough. It's so important. I think it's got lost as well again in this get rich quick system like Bitcoin. Someone said to me the other day, I'm going to do Bitcoin or start my own business. Both going to cost £26,000 to buy one Bitcoin and start a business. What should I do? I'm like, of course, start your own business. You're going to learn a lot. Buying Bitcoin, you're just going to stare at a screen and have happy days and sad days based on what a screen says. But,
the Bitcoin thing, I do feel more like a dinosaur. But I look at Bitcoin and think, I just don't get it.
Well, it's kind of a new version of stocks, isn't it? It's just a slightly flashier. Upside is huger. No back.
Well, except that behind the stock is a company that makes things that makes a profit.
Yeah.
Every stock there is a.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Even you're true. I mean, Bitcoin. The argument is the opposite. The benefit of Bitcoin is it doesn't have that. It doesn't have anything holding it back. But it's kind of sad that entrepreneurship is getting boiled down to making money. And your point there about enjoy the journey is actually what it's about. It's just so important.
There's something very enjoyable about building a team of bright, motivated people and working with them. It's stimulating. It's exciting. It's a journey that you go on with everybody in your team. And if there's the one thing I miss about being in a portfolio environment is that I deal, of course, with the companies that I have stakes in, but I don't have one place to go to where I have a bunch of bright people who are excited about what they're doing. There's a sense of purpose, and I think there is too much focus on exit. That's largely because businesses are funded by funds that need an exit within the life of the fund. If I look at the two of the businesses that I admire the most, the White Company and Charles Schurz, husband and wife team, neither of them have raised any money for their businesses. And they have built the most extraordinary businesses, hugely profitable, very successful businesses.
It's like you're doing a commercial for me, by the way, because that is the next podcast after you.
Who's that? Which one? Nick or Christy?
Nick.
Yeah. So what? I mean, they are sort of a couple of my entrepreneurial heroes in that they're both having a successful business is within the same family. It's quite incredible. They've kept them, they run them, and the great thing about doing that, about not raising money, is that it's 100% yours, so you can keep it forever.
Totally. Yeah. It's underrated, isn't it? It's so underrated that whole concept. And I say it's getting a bit lost. So it's great to have you on and share those points.
And it is one of those things that I really I really admire businesses that have started small, have grown organically, and done entirely organically without external funding, because that is a real triumph.
Patience, is the word, isn't it? But look, I'm going to sum up a few things that I've taken away from today's podcast. It's not all about winning. I think there's so much more to it than that. Don't overspend. It's not all about raising money. Sometimes having no money can be a really powerful asset to you as a business. I don't think you just need to raise money. I think being held to account, as entrepreneurs, I think we all resist it. But what Nick said today, I think is so true. Sometimes having people hold you account is a way of training you, a way of learning. I've always learned by having customers give me feedback, for example. Being held to account is very valuable. Don't resist it. Of course, make sure the person that's holding to account, you can have a laugh with, and hopefully can shrug off any bad feeling it can cause having honest conversations. But having someone that holds you to account is really powerful. I think, don't screw your customers, despite business models out there doing it right now. Make decisions. I think that's crucial. Absolutely crucial. If you're sitting there wondering what to do, you sit there so long, you run out of cash wondering what to do. Do think about shutdown costs. Try to build moral code into your business. I know you don't hear it very often. I know it's not an exciting, clickbait item. Here's my shutdown cost slide. But it'd be interesting, I think, psychologically, to show what actually matters to you. Exit or looking after your people. I think enjoy risk. All in. It's the kind of theme I think from Nick today. If you really want to be successful, I couldn't believe in it more. If you've got that fire in your belly, that's all you need. That's all you need. And if you can come up with a way to monetize a couples meeting up app after COVID, I think you could make an absolute fortune. So I want to thank you all for listening to today's podcast. We know you could be listening to 784,000 other podcasts, and you take the time to listen to us. We feel incredibly lucky. Nick, I want to thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure.